Hello, Trail Seeker, and welcome to another exciting episode of the Learn True Health podcast. Well, this episode is quite a special one because we have just surpassed 3 million downloads. I launched the podcast back in March of 2016, and in the last 2.5 years, it has been such an honor to be with you on this journey to learn true health, to learn what it is to create, to cultivate, to explore, and produce excellent results around our health, emotionally, mentally, physically, energetically, and spiritually. I myself have also been on a health journey. As you know, for the last 7 years, I have been working on healing many of my issues and have been quite successful. I've reversed type 2 diabetes, chronic adrenal fatigue, chronic infections, polycystic ovarian syndrome, and infertility. My last biggest challenge that I've been working on since launching this podcast has been to achieve an optimal weight level and fitness level. It has been such an awesome journey with you. Reaching that 3 million download mark has allowed me to reflect over this past few days and think about everything I've learned and the impact that this podcast has had on my health and my life, and also the lives of my friends and family. And I imagine you, the listener, are just right there with me exploring this wonderful journey. I love that we can take all these little tidbits from each guest and add it to our life. And even though it may seem like baby steps, we look back a year or 2 years later and realized what a significant change those differences made. I love using things like the sunlight and sauna in my life on a regular basis. It decreases my stress and improves my sleep and my energy levels. And I've really noticed a change in my detoxification around heavy metals. It's been so exciting to do these little things, like I said, these little baby steps, and then you turn around and look back and realize, if you've been doing them for a few months, what a difference it makes. A few episodes ago, I interviewed Chef AJ, and since then I decided to do the challenge and take on her diet, which seemed daunting at first, and I've read her books, and I thought there's no way I could do this, but then I decided to just give it a try, do it for 30 days, and I'm now approaching 2.5 weeks, about 2.5 weeks that I've been eating her diet, and I've lost 9.4 pounds in 2.5 weeks, and I'm not hungry, and I have way more energy than I ever have. So that just goes to show you that it really does start with mentality. It really does start with our mindset. I had a mindset before that I couldn't do it because it seemed too hard. And then after I interviewed her, I joined her program, which I think her program's something like $150. Really just a wonderful program that lays it all out, gives you a cooking list and everything, and shows you exactly how to do the diet, and then a very supportive Facebook group that's incredibly active. And so, like I said, I just jumped in, started cooking like all of her recipes and eating it, and my family's doing it too. And in the last 2.5 weeks, I've almost lost 10 pounds effortlessly without being hungry and while having tons of energy. So this is where it all starts, these little changes. And sometimes we catch ourselves and realize, wow, I have a limiting belief around that. Like I never thought I could ever give up meat. And if you've been listening since January, you know I've been struggling with this idea of going totally plant-based, giving up all animal products. And I'm not saying that everyone has to do it. I believe that we need to all find our own path, but we should be willing to experiment. And sometimes it takes facing our beliefs and our limiting decisions we made about ourselves. Some people believe they can't change their diet or can't change their patterns because of something that's happened in their past. And so they need to dive inside themselves and go, is that really true? Is it really true that I can't do this? Or am I creating excuses? Or maybe there's something in my past I need to heal and just give it a try and move forward. So I like that these guests that we're interviewing challenge us, challenge our belief system about ourselves, about our body's ability to heal, that challenges us and allows us to see where we have room to grow. And today's guest does just the same thing. as many of our other guests, in challenging our belief system and showing us that our body has an amazing ability to heal itself. And no matter what you're struggling with right now, you can heal it. You absolutely can. And we're here to help. The Learn True Health podcast is here to help you. Please join our community. We have a free Facebook group, Learn True Health on Facebook. Just search for it. Join our free group. It's a wonderful community. I love connecting with all the listeners, and even some of our guests come and join the community as well. We have lively discussions about different documentaries and books and videos and recipes, and even holistic hair products or cosmetics, and just whatever questions you have, you can pose it to the group. We're all like-minded there. And if you'd love to support the Learn True Health podcast, please consider becoming a Patreon supporter. You can pledge $1 a month, $5 a month, $100 a month, whatever you feel moved to do. Every dollar goes towards producing the Learn True Health podcast. Thank you so much for being a supporter, for listening, and for sharing the Learn True Health podcast with your friends. I can't wait to see how quickly it takes to achieve the next 3 million download. That would be really cool to see within the next few months how quickly we can accelerate this and grow this and help millions of people to learn true health. Welcome to the Learn True Health podcast. I'm your host, Ashley James. This is episode 281. Today we're certainly in for an interesting interview. We have with us Dr. Daniel Stickler, who is committed to creating a new paradigm for health and wellness. I love that. You always hear that it all starts with mindset. Well, today we're going to discover what that really means. Welcome to the show.
Thanks. Great to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. You have quite the track record of experience going from the very traditional allopathic medicine to wanting to be better, be more, and helping people where we just weren't helping people. And I see that what you really want to do is help people to be like the best they can be, have optimal health in all meanings of the sense. And so you've really branched out from your roots. I'd love for you to start by sharing your story, though. What led you to want to be a doctor, and then what happened to have you see that there is so much more that we could be doing to help people become the best versions of themselves?
Well, it's an interesting story, and I'll try to keep it as short as I can here. When I went into medical school, I had this kind of ideal of what I thought medicine was about. I didn't really have anybody in medicine in my family, but from the time I was in second grade, I can recall wanting to be a doctor. And I think it was probably my pediatrician at the time who I actually looked forward to going to my appointments, because he was he was kind of like a Mr. Rogers type of guy, but he was always asking me about things I did in my, playing baseball and my artwork and all of this. So, I saw medicine as really enhancing the human experience. And when I got into medical school, realized it was more about disease model and about postponement of death than it was about really optimizing the experience itself. And so I got in there, I was disenchanted. I continued through it, and I found surgery as kind of that happy medium to allow me to do what I enjoyed doing, but I wasn't doing the standard of trying to postpone death in a stepwise fashion or anything like that. I saw it as, somebody comes in with a problem and you can intervene and generally bring them back to their baseline of quality of life. And a couple of years later, I discovered a process. It was called age management at the time. And it was kind of dabbling into that world of enhancing the human experience. And I thought, well, this is interesting. First time I've ever heard of this in medicine. And so I pursued some affiliations with a company called Synergenics at that time. And then I realized there was also some limitations to that as well, that, it was more about somewhat about an enhancement using hormones and things like that, not quite the full extent of what I had envisioned. And we developed our own process with that over time. And then once we added genetics to that, and I added genetics in about 2007, out of more of a frustration of not understanding it, when clients were bringing me their genetic data and they're like, what does this mean? And it was stuff I'd never seen before. So I was fascinated and started adding that into the piece. We developed an entire program around systems-based precision lifestyle medicine is the best way to phrase it. But it was taking the human system as a whole. And the interesting thing is the Greeks actually had this right from the get-go, and we just kind of morphed it into our own definition of health and wellness. But the Greeks understood this whole systems-based approach to looking at the human system, where it's not about just presence or absence of disease. In fact, they really didn't even recognize disease. They recognized that the human system was out of homeostasis, out of balance in some way. And they would look at nutrition, they would look at your activity levels, they would look at your family relationships, they would look at your job satisfactions. And all of that was about the health and thriving of the human system, rather than looking at these stovepipes of disease. And that's what we're kind of getting back to. We looked at all of these, the healthcare system and even health and wellness. It's not a fixable system, in my opinion. I mean, it's great for when you're sick, but for people who aren't sick, and even some people that are sick, they need a systems-based approach that is looking at their sleep, looking at their nutrition, looking at their movement, their hormones, their cognitive function, their relationships, their passions, looking at all of that in order to bring the entire system into balance again. And so we said, it's not a matter of trying to fix this. We've been trying to fix it for years and we're not getting anywhere. It's a system that isn't fixable based on the baseline model. So we said, okay, let's create from scratch a new human model of health and wellness. And that's essentially what we did.
So what you're saying is that the medical system that we have today, sometimes referred to as allopathic medicine, when trying to distinguish going to an MD versus a holistic approach, like you said, at looking at the all systems, the allopathic medical system is not, there's no way to fix it because it is not complete. It is not looking at the person as a whole. It's looking at different pieces and parts and treating symptoms. And so you're seeing that what in order to really help someone, they have to be treated holistically.
Yes, and I don't want to kind of isolate that to just the allopathic system either. I mean, even when you look at functional medicine, there is still an approach in functional medicine that is not quite holistic either. You look at a lot of functional medicine people and they say, oh, it's your thyroid or it's your adrenals. So they're still stovepiping these factors instead of really taking the holistic approach. And that's why I say that it's not a matter of fixing the system. I mean, alternative care and functional care, all of those were attempts to fix this system. And here's what it comes down to is that the human system as a whole is a complex system. And complex means that the outcomes based on inputs are highly variable, and there's a lot of variables that go into an output. But medicine and health and wellness have looked at the human model as a complicated system. And complicated systems have predictable outcomes. And that's why we have all these algorithms in medicine that we try to follow that don't work a lot of the times, is because it's based on the system being complicated. I always like to use the example of, if you take an airplane, it's a flying machine. And we can break down every piece of that airplane and tell you exactly what each part does based on an input to each part. So there's a predictable outcome 100% of the time. That's a complicated flying machine. But if you take a bird, you can't do that because a bird is a complex system, and you can't take it to a reductionist level and have predictable outcomes with it. But a complicated system, you can. And we've made this assumption since I don't know when, but on the human system that it's complicated. And there's where the premise goes wrong. It's like, trying to create a flying machine and not obeying the laws of aerodynamics. It just doesn't work.
I like that you mentioned the word reductionistic. That really is what it feels like when you go to the quote unquote traditional doctor nowadays. You barely see them for 15 minutes. And it's not because they don't have a really big heart and they really want to help people as a doctor. It's just the way the entire system, the way the insurance is set up, the way billing is set up, the way their training is. They come in, they assess the situation, they may look at some labs and they might throw a drug at someone. But
Absolutely.
they don't have enough time, and the nurse will see you more for a longer period of time and ask you a bunch of questions, than the doctor will. And how do we know that this is all this information is being conveyed in a way that really is looking at your life as a whole? I know so many people who have been misdiagnosed. In fact, I know Harvard did a statistic. They did some studies and they saw that on average, 70% of the time, when they took someone and they had the initial diagnosis, if they went to a second or third or fourth opinion, they would get a different diagnosis. And that, with an autoimmune condition, it takes on average going to 6 different doctors before a final diagnosis is made. So, there's not one, golden path, when it comes to the reductionistic model, because they're looking down at, okay, here's this thyroid, and then that's all they're seeing. I've heard of people who go to the Mayo Clinic and they think that this is the mecca of medicine, and then they're very disappointed because they just felt like over here they talk to this doctor about their thyroid, over here they talk to this doctor about their sleep apnea, over here they talk to this doctor about their back pain, and they didn't feel like any of the doctors were really communicating as a team, and they were all just kind of treating the different symptoms or the different pieces of their body instead of going, well, what's causing all of this? Or how can we support the person as a whole? And so I love what you're doing is you're looking at the person as a whole. Now, if they were doing this back in ancient Greece, what happened? Why aren't doctors trained to do holistic medicine?
I don't have a good answer for that. I've studied the ancient Greek philosophies of Anaximander and Pythagoras and Hippocrates and looked at the way I mean, even dietetica, the term dietetica was not about nutrition alone. Dietetica was about your sleeping patterns. It was about your working relationships. It was about what you ate and how much. It was about, what are you passionate about in life? So dietetica was actually all encompassing. It wasn't all just, about eating behaviors. So I'm not sure where we deviated from that baseline, but specialization has been a bit of a impact on creating that. I mean, and again, this is not isolated to allopathic. We have cardiologists, we have nephrologists, we have rheumatologists, and nobody communicates very well between them. And that was the whole role of the primary care doctor, was to be that integration of all of it, which we've lost. But you also see this in the functional world. I always like to say, when you've invented the hammer, everything's a nail. So you go to this functional guy and he's a thyroid expert. Well, everything that they're going to talk to you about is the thyroid. Or you go to this female functional doctor, or allopathic or homeopathic doctor, and they're the adrenal fatigue expert. Well, then everything that you have is related to adrenal fatigue. So we have a lot of people that specialize now, rather than taking a systems approach and looking at all pieces together before you jump into, you're a nail and I have the hammer.
Now, I definitely want to dive deeper into understanding how you help treat the person by looking at the systems. But I'd love to first know, what are your tools? So you've looked at their sleep, you've looked at their relationships, you've looked at their emotional, their mental health, their spiritual health, their energetic health, how how they feel about themselves, and also how everything's functioning in their labs, and you're just looking at absolutely every aspect of their life. And now you've noticed that there's some things that could be improved upon. Do you get out your prescription pad? Like, what are your tools to help people get healthy again?
Well, a lot of it is coaching. So I see the role of health and wellness, um, kind of the health and wellness practitioners and the medical doctors as becoming more coaches. I mean, with the current sick model and the algorithmic aspects of it, AI is doing better than what we're doing as clinicians. It really is. I mean, once you have algorithms, then there's no point in having the intermediary anymore. We're already seeing this with GoogleNet out diagnosing pathologists and radiologists both. We have the new Dexter that just won the Tricorder X Prize last year that outdiagnosed primary care doctors in like 14 categories of illness with an at-home little kit that people can use. So I think we're losing the ground to AI on disease care. So where does that leave us as health practitioners, whether we're physicians or coaches? It leaves us as coaches. And that's the interaction that needs to happen, because despite the fact that AI is really good and deep learning is getting better, it's not a complex thinking system. And you can't just use complicated thinking systems to help you give an outcome for a complex system. You've got to have that intermediary. So we can rely on the computers to correlate all this complicated data that we can't see relationships of things and all this, and then interpret that through our own brains in order to provide um, the ability for us to help make changes in a client. So when we take as much biometrics as we possibly can. So we do QEEG brain mapping, we do psychophysiologic stress profiles, we do quality of life intake questionnaires, we do health consciousness scales. We look at biometric data from wearable devices. We do lab work. I mean, we do a whole host of things, but it's a matter of bringing it all together into something that is where you start to see patterns of things, and those patterns help guide interventions in moving forward.
Fascinating. I love that you brought up AI. That's I have a young child, and where's his career? What's his career path going to look like when, by the time he's in his 20s, computers are able to perform most of our, or robots are able to perform most of our jobs? And that's just that is the future. We need to prepare for that that AI is going to take over doctors' jobs. But that leaves you, I love that it leaves you in a place to actually be a human doctor, to sit down and have time with the patient. Now, how much time do you spend with the patient when after you've been able to do all these tests and do your coaching, do you get to sit down with them for half an hour or an hour or 90 minutes and really look them in the eyes and maybe hold their hand and have them feel like there's someone finally listening to them?
Well, we're a lot different than most. We we do a 2-day intake with clients, and in the 16 hours that we have with them, I generally spend 3 to 4 hours when they first arrive, and so I'm one-on-one with them during that time. And then they go through some further testing. They go through a full human movement screen with our movement coach. They go through a nutritional counseling with our nutritional coach. They get a body composition scan, bone density, and body composition by DEXA. They do the QEEG, they do the psychostress profile, and then on the second day, at the end of that, I spend generally 3 to 4 hours with them FaceTime to bring everything together, come up with a plan that works for them. And the one thing I tell them is I'm functioning as a coach, and what I do is I'm just kind of the guide. I'm not the one that's making it happen. I'm the one that's giving you the guidance on this. I always like to use the example of Sir Edmund Hillary. You know, he was the first man to summit Mount Everest. And I asked people who the second man was. And the second man was only a couple seconds behind him, which was Tenzing Norgay. And Tenzing Norgay was the Sherpa that had made multiple attempts at the mountain with other climbers. And he was the Sherpa that helped Sir Edmund Hillary get there. And that's essentially what we do, is we are the Sherpa that is helping guide this, but they're steering the boat. I mean, they're the ones that make the decisions. I just provide my input from my background and my expertise to help guide them in making those decisions. But the ultimate decision in anything they do is theirs.
Oh, I imagine like the world's best caddy for for the world's best
Right.
golfer. The caddy comes up and goes, this is the time you use your 9 iron."
But then, you know, after that initial evaluation, then I do 30 to 40-minute coaching calls once a month with every client. So every month we're on a call and we're saying, okay, what's working, what's not working? Have we achieved this goal? Are we ready for the next one? And I look at their biometric data. I talk to them about how they're feeling, you know, what kind of results they're getting. You know, I say, oh, you know, what happened to your sleep? Your sleep tanked in the last week. Something's going on, or your heart rate variability is really starting to drop, or it's really increasing with this change we made. This is great. So we're getting data constantly, and we're getting feedback constantly so that we can continue to progress forward, because we essentially have three tiers of what we call our health parameters, which is the first tier to achieve is homeostasis. And that's where we bring all the systems into balance and get those in a state of homeostasis that means there's nothing left behind. So, you know, they may be great on nutrition and exercise, but their sleep is still 5-6 hours a night. You know, we got a problem there. So they're not balanced until they bring all of those up to that level. Once they get there, then we start talking about optimization. So what's the next step? You know, how do we take these parameters and boost them through lifestyle factors, supplementation factors, anything like that? And then once they're there, then the fun really begins, where we can start talking about enhancements. And enhancements are things that are beyond lifestyle factors that can actually take that human state to a new level of function.
Now, you say enhancements. I know, like, someone who is working out because they want to get a lot of muscle might think steroids are enhancement. You're obviously not talking about steroids. What are some tools that you have for human enhancement once someone has, may been able to maintain homeostasis?
Well, the biggest thing that people want is either anti-aging, or they want cognitive enhancement. You know, everybody's striving for that cognitive enhancement, but unfortunately they like to bypass steps. They like to go from below homeostasis right into cognitive enhancement. So, you know, they're taking all these new kind of nootropics and things like that to say, oh, I really want to have better focus and concentration, and yet they're sleeping 4 hours a night, or they're
Mm.
eating cheeseburgers and drinking cokes, and they want to skip into that top tier when they haven't even achieved tier one, and it just doesn't work. They might get a brief boost, but in the long run, they're actually going to cause more problems than they're helping. So I try to kind of keep them tamed down to understand that they've got to get those baseline characteristics fixed first, and then move into that realm where we can start entering into some of the nootropics and the cognitive enhancers that can really boost that level beyond where they've been able to take it naturally.
Right, it's kind of you're helping them build a healthy house when you're giving them all the raw building blocks the body needs to finally be a healthy house. And so they're still got the bricklayer out, and then all of a sudden they're calling over the designer to hang the curtains. And you're like,
Right.
"Wait a second, we're not putting in finishes yet. We need to build the house first."
Exactly.
People want to jump ahead and just paint over the house before it's fully built. And it's true because we're so desperate to feel good. We've been feeling bad for so long. We just want to finally feel good and have our mental clarity back. And so people really do gravitate towards those cognitive enhancers or they think that anti-aging medicine is going to make the aches and pains go away.
Right.
And so they're just going to focus on those kind of enhancements through supplements, or IV, therapies. And I love what you're pointing out, is that if we don't have the foundations of health, you're really not going to have long-term effects from any of those enhancements. When you sit down with them and you're coaching them on diet, do you have one specific diet that you found to be the most effective, or is it really each person needs a tailored diet?
Well, I've got a lot of background in diet. I was a bariatrician, so I did medical weight loss, but I was also a surgical weight loss, um, gastric bypass surgeon. Essentially, I did 3,000 gastric bypass operations during my surgical career. And with that, I mean, we had actually gone into that realm of systems based. We had two registered dietitians, we had two exercise physiologists, we had a gym in our office, we had two health psychologists, and we required ongoing classes for everybody who went through it. And yet we didn't see those outcomes. And that's one of the reasons I just, one day I just walked out of surgery and I said, I'm done, I'm not going to do anymore. And that ended my surgical career that day. And I just said, this isn't right. So I stepped away from anything weight loss at that point, and that was back in 2009. Because what I discovered is there was no perfect human diet. It doesn't exist. Everybody's different, and really genetics opened my eyes to that. Understanding how genetics works. I crack up every time somebody talks about, well, the Inuit Eskimos eat 90% of their calories from fat, and they have no heart disease, and they're not obese and all this, so it must be a good diet for me. Well, from a genetic standpoint, they're ancestrally adapted to that kind of a dietary pattern, and they thrive in that kind of a diet. I mean, that's a beautiful thing about this intelligent design of our genetics. I mean, nobody gives the credit that is due to our genetics. It is such a dynamic process, and it's not nature versus nurture or nature and nurture. It's actually that dynamic interaction between the two. Is that our bodies, I mean, with every breath we take, there is a kind of a sensing of the environment that each cell in our body will make changes in gene expression in order to optimize our thriving in that environment. And that's the epigenetic piece on top of it. And that's the really cool area of where we can really elicit changes. This is where we get into going beyond homeostasis into that optimized state, is how do we leverage the epigenetic expressions to allow for us to thrive. And diet's one of those key pieces. So in diet, I mean, there's certain genetic variants that people carry that suggest that probably not going to have the best outcome with a high fat diet, especially when it comes to saturated fats. Now, I can tell you from my experience in doing over 3,000 genetic reviews and looking at outcomes, long-term outcomes with these clients, the Mediterranean diet is probably the closest thing to, if you wanted to pick one diet that's going to work best, it's the traditional Mediterranean diet. And the traditional diet, the Mediterranean diet, is a little different than most people perceive. They didn't do a lot of grains in the traditional Mediterranean diet. I mean, they had some, but not to any degree that a lot of people promote. It was mostly fish and seafood and a lot of vegetables, but a ton of olive oil. And olive oil, from a gene expression standpoint, is the nectar of the gods. I mean, this stuff has such profound impact on the expression of our genes that the traditional diet, the average person was consuming a liter of olive oil a week. I mean, that is huge. And olive oil, omega-3s from fish, I mean, these are all things that create changes in gene expression in our bodies that are just profound with the health benefits.
That is really interesting. It's interesting and confusing when I've interviewed so many doctors and they all have their opinion about diet, and like Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn says no oil at all because it hurts the epithelial, lining of the arteries. And then there'll be another doctor that says, "Oh, olive oil's amazing and we should just be just drinking it from the bottle." And I love that you brought up that that we are not, we're not all the same. That I might have a British and German, heritage looking at my genes, and someone else might be from West Africa, and someone else might be from Okinawa, and for 100 generations or more, their families ate a certain way, and so their body optimized to gain the nutrients from that type of eating. And so now, because we're such a global um world, like we can eat, I can go out for Thai food for lunch and Indian for dinner. I could have all kinds of diets in my diet, and our bodies just, we didn't have that 3 generations ago. That's just not how our genes just are not used to this, right?
Well, you look at things like MTHFR, and I'm sure you've heard all of the scare tactics around having an MTHFR mutation. What Number one, what most people don't understand is MTHFR is not a mutation; it's a polymorphism or a gene variant. Mutations have to occur in less than 1% of the population, and we're talking about around 25% have variants on the minor allele of MTHFR. So it's far from a mutation, but there's a lot of scare tactics about it. Now, if you lived in Africa, the MTHFR recessive is very common, and the thing is, it provides benefits in that environment, in a folate-rich environment, and even people living in Africa that are malnourished still get a ton of folate in their diet. In a folate-rich environment, there's actually a benefit to fetal survival. So a fetus that is carrying what we would call a mutation in some people is a survival benefit. They have a much greater chance of surviving in a folate-rich environment. So if the mother's getting adequate amounts of folate in the diet, they have a better survival than a fetus that's carrying the normal variant. And even in cancer rates, in a folate-rich environment, an MTHFR polymorphism that would be considered detrimental is actually beneficial. It reduces the chances of colon cancer. So in that environment, it's ideal. It's adapted to thrive in that environment, and that's why those polymorphisms exist in our population, is to allow us to be able to do things like lactose. Being able to digest lactose as an adult, is only 35% of the world population actually can do so.
Mm-hmm.
And the people who can are usually of Northern European descent. So why would that group have that? Well, the theory behind this is that as the human race kind of moved into those northern environments, they started domesticating animals. Well, in a tropical environment, milk wouldn't persist. But in a colder environment, you can keep milk around for a couple of days. Plus, they had the domestication of animals. And then you start going through periods of famine because of the cold winters and things like that. Well, the domesticated animals are still going to produce milk from their fat. So they're still producing milk despite not having the hay to eat or anything like that. So the people who could actually digest the lactose as an adult actually had a survival benefit. And so they're the ones that tended to survive and propagate. And so people coming from that northern European ancestry tend to be able to digest lactose as adults.
Is it healthier for them? Would it benefit someone that is a descendant to continue to have milk in their diet? Is it something that would be healthy, or could 100% of the population be healthy by removing milk?
I'm not a big fan of milk as an adult. It's not anything that is a health benefit per se, in my opinion. It's a lot of liquid calories, and there's a little bit of health benefits from kind of the raw milk aspects of things, but overall it's an unnecessary part. But what I'm getting at here is that it was developed as a survival necessity, a thriving mechanism that the genes were adjusted to really providing that. It's just the same with ApoE. Everybody talks about ApoE4 and the high saturated fat diets and the Alzheimer's risk. Well, there's actually benefits, and you see this also in a more African population where they carry the ApoE4 more commonly. There's a huge benefit there in protection against viral illnesses. So they have a protection against viral illnesses in their environment. They don't have a lot of saturated fat exposure, but they do have a lot of viral exposure. So carrying that variant in that population is a survival benefit, but carrying that variant in a more Western type of lifestyle is not necessarily that valuable. So you have to kind of adjust your lifestyle around some of the genetics that you carry.
I had heard that the BRCA gene for breast cancer, that there was, because, now women were having their breasts removed once they had the genetic tests, because they were afraid that because they had this BRCA expression that they would eventually develop breast cancer, and so they were having them removed as preventive medicine, but that there was many benefits to having that genetic expression. Can you speak to that?
Well, every variant that we encounter, and again, these are polymorphisms, these are not mutations.
Hmm.
So every polymorphism has some, and in some cases, yet unidentified benefit. Our, our genetics, it's such an intelligent design of adaptation that there's always some reason why a variant occurs more commonly or at a certain degree in the population. There's always a benefit that we're finding. So as time goes on, we start finding these additional benefits with each one. Now, I'm not familiar with the benefit of the BRCA right now, but it certainly does not surprise me that there would be a benefit in some way, because our bodies just don't work that way. I mean, the only time we kind of have what we call a epigenetic trap is things like environmental exposures to BPA and phthalates and things like that can actually trick our epigenetic expression. But in general, most of these polymorphisms are more related to a survival benefit. In fact, they've called it the Red Queen theory, from Alice Through the Looking Glass, where she was in the Red Queen race and they had to run faster and faster just to stay in one place. So an organism that is not constantly adapting to new environments is destined for extinction.
And you see that with our own human genetics, that we're constantly having to adapt.
Exactly. And people will say, well, we need to do exactly the way our ancestors did 12,000 years ago. Well, I don't buy into that, because understanding of the genetics, I can tell you, if you took somebody from today's environment and dropped them back 12,000 years ago, it wouldn't be a matter of them having difficulty surviving because of lack of skills. It would be a matter of them surviving because of lack of adaptation of their genetics over from that environment, from this environment to that environment. We're constantly adapting, and it's not necessarily a changing code. We don't see changes in the DNA code. We see changes in genetic expressions within that code. So it's the epigenetics that's controlling which genes are turned on, which are turned off, which are upregulated, and which are downregulated.
And are you able to help someone to make those changes? Have you actually seen on genetic tests that through lifestyle and diet and nutrition and other therapies that you have at your disposal, that you're able to see expressions turn on and off as you support that person to better health?
We don't see them from an objective standpoint of like a test that we can do. I mean, there are some tests coming online now that test methylation patterns on the genes, that's what determines whether genes are turned on or off. You have some universal ones, but it's a pretty dynamic process. I mean, we're constantly turning things on and off in the body. I know one of our instructors in our academy is Lucia Aronica, who teaches epigenetics at Stanford. She's doing some research right now on dietary patterns and epigenetic expression changes on the genes in the white blood cell line, and some of those can be universal changes. But in general, what we do, and this is the coaching aspect, you have to kind of look at outcomes. I mean, we know a lot of things. We know things like, meditation on a regular basis will change the expression of 1,500 genes. We know that regular exercise over a 6-month period will change the expression of 7,000 genes. I mean, that's a third of our genome. We know that a meal of high omega-3 changes expressions of genes in the short term about 300 to 400 genes, but then if you chronically eat a diet like that, you can change several thousand gene expressions. So we know that these environmental components are constantly manipulating our gene expression, but it's all about the body adapting to new environments and thriving in those environments.
So you've just mentioned some amazing positive things that everyone today could immediately start uh, applying to their life, to their lifestyle, to shift their genetic expression to be healthier. What about things that we're exposed to? Do you have any statistics for if we're exposed to, let's say, we have a vaccine and we're exposed to heavy metals, or we're exposed to BPA or environmental toxins? How many genetic expressions are affected in a negative way?
Well, and that's a big question right now. I mean, we know that a lot of the environmental chemicals are what we call epigenetic traps, where they actually kind of cause a glitch. They're like a virus in a computer system. They will cause changes in gene expressions that aren't necessarily adaptive to thriving, and we're seeing that with a lot of the hormonal aspects. I mean, we already see a significant drop in testosterone levels in both males and females over time. And we know that there's a lot of environmental chemical exposures that are contributing to that. Not only phthalates and BPAs, but also things like vinclozolin, which is used as a spray on golf courses and on grapes for wine. Pretty profound impacts. And, the reason that people talk about, conspiracy theories of the government with this stuff, but it's not that. It's, you know, one of the problems we have with not being able to get a direct test on epigenetics is that everything is based on correlation studies and not causation studies. And the government's very strict on making recommendations based on correlation studies. They want definite causation. And the problem is we're stuck with not being able to get full causation on a lot of these environmental chemicals. And so the correlation studies are all that we have. And despite the fact that the public outcry is there saying, we see this correlation, their laws are based on causation. And that is not a conspiracy thing. That is just more of that's the way they work. They look for causations, even though, we feel very strongly about certain aspects of this. That the heavy metal stuff, I mean, a lot of people want to detox all these heavy metals. And, heavy metals there's some benefits to some of the heavy metals. I mean, exposure to low doses of them are beneficial because they upregulate detoxification systems. These heavy metal detoxes, though, our philosophy on that is the best way to manage that is to really upregulate the body's own ability to detoxify. It's rare that we encounter somebody that's got enough of a load of something that they need a chelation therapy or something like that. I mean, you've got to look at, how's the glutathione system functioning? How's your cytochrome P450 system functioning? And this is where we kind of look at the genetics and see what genetic variations they may carry that could potentially cause them to absorb a little bit more of the inorganic mercury or the methyl mercury from fish. So we can look at different gene variants that suggest that they may be more at risk with this. And most of the testing right now, it doesn't look at load. Most of the testing that we get, even the tri testing where we're looking at hair, urine, and blood and serum all together, it still only gives you recent exposure. It doesn't give you total load of the heavy metal. And so it's very difficult for us to test load of heavy metal because a lot of it is intracellular. And I think it's overhyped in a lot of the alternative care realms. So our goal was to really kind of upregulate the human system because, again, the human system is just miraculous in what it's capable of doing. We can't replicate, we can't override it in a way that's better than what it can do when it's thriving in a homeostatic state.
Absolutely. Are you familiar with Dr. Diadamo's book Eat Right for Your Blood Type? He sort of proposed that similar to what you're saying, that we should consider our heritage when selecting our diet, and look at, if we were from Asia, then we should eat like Asians. If we are from Africa, we should eat like our, grandparents and great grandparents and great great grandparents ate, because if 100 generations, ate sweet potatoes, then we should eat sweet potatoes. And if 100 generations didn't eat any rice and ate very little starch and really thrived off of maybe more saturated fats and meat with our vegetables, then that's how we should eat.
Yeah, I mean that it's a simplistic version of kind of a genetic based diet, but I mean, as you know, we're such a hodgepodge of different nationalities now. We
Right.
don't have that very strict uh, lineage to trace back to what we've most optimized for, and that's why we can look at our genetics and we can look at polymorphisms within these genetics and get a suggestion of a dietary probability. And that's why, I say any direct consumer genetic testing is probably not going to be very accurate for any person. We train epigenetic coaches, which are coaches that are trained to interpret the genetic data, but then also understand the epigenetic piece on top of that and how to assess that. And it's a dynamic process. You can't just say, okay, well, this is what this shows, so this is the diet you should eat. You've got to test it. You've got to go through that and say, okay, is this working? Is it not working? And not just from a subjective standpoint, but looking at objective measures, looking at blood work, looking at heart rate variability changes and things that predict health outcomes.
Ah, I love that you're looking at things that predict health outcomes. What about the microbiome? They discovered a tribe that for several months would live only off of basically tubers or something similar to sweet potatoes or yams. And that when they analyzed their microbiome, they discovered that their bacteria had adapted to be able to help them assimilate all the nutrients the body needed. So they weren't deficient in vitamin C or in iron, and they were getting everything from basically potatoes. Because as their diet changed through the seasons, depending on what was available to eat at the time, their microbiome would change to adapt with their diet to help them assimilate all the nutrients. And now, of course, in the modern day, we've many people have had courses of antibiotics. If we've had any exposure to glyphosate or BP corn, for example, then our microbiome has been severely damaged. How much of helping someone repopulate the gut and improve the strength of the microbiome do you pay attention to?
Well, the microbiome is absolutely important, and it's part of the human system. I mean, our that intelligent design doesn't end at the skin level or the mucosal level. I mean, it extends out into the environment, and the microbiome, even though the gut is actually the internal portion of the gut is actually external to our human system itself. It's still an intricate part of it. It's a symbiotic relationship, and things that affect that are going to change that. And the goal of any symbiotic organism is to also help the host survive as well. So there's adaptations that they have in there as well. Now, microbiome is one of those ones that I'm just not fully convinced we have the ability to get an accurate picture of the microbiome right now. We're waiting on the study out of Stanford that Les Stefflison was doing on the gut portion of the Human Microbiome Project, where I mean, he was having study participants submit 75 plus stool samples during the course of the interventions that they were doing with them to look at the dynamic nature of the microbiome. But my conversations with him, he's in agreement that right now, any of these direct tests that are out there, even some of the specialty lab tests, they just don't provide a true insight into the microbiome.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm waiting his results should be out in the fall at some point that we might have a better idea of how that works. The other thing is once you identify it, how do you change it? And that's going to be the difficult part. As a surgeon, I did hundreds of colonoscopies, and everybody's talking about cleanses and all this, and you want a good $2 cleanse to get a bottle of mag citrate. It will absolutely clean out your entire microbiome from your gut in a matter of hours. I've put colonoscopes up there, and they've been absolutely clear on the view of the colon there. So biggest biomass reduction that you're ever going to encounter is during that time. And yet within 3 days, the microbiome is back to the exact same mix that it was before the cleanse.
Amazing.
So it's a very resilient system, and it's highly responsive to environmental changes. The Hadza man who was living with the Hadzas and injected stool up his butt with a turkey baster, he was able to shift his microbiome, but as soon as he moved back to Chicago, it went back to where it was before. So it's the environment that you're in that the body adapts to.
So is that the same for those who have the medical procedure where they have stool basically put up there from someone else, from a donor, to help them repopulate the gut? Does it not last?
Well, that's a little different because the whole goal there is to starve out the pathogenic bacteria. So stool transplants, what happens is that people develop most of the time the healthy bacteria starve out or keep the pathogenic bacteria under control. And then in certain health conditions, you can see that the pathogenic bacteria get a foothold and they're able to grow and not be suppressed so much by the healthy bacteria. So it's a matter of trying to get a rapid shift in the mix enough to keep that pathogenic bacteria at a minimum. And so that's where those stool transplants can bring it back to baseline. But you've also got to make sure that you really are keeping the lifestyle factors under control during that as well.
Mm. Now you had mentioned that that spray that they put on grapes and also put on golf courses is very detrimental. Would drinking organic, if someone was a wine drinker, would drinking organic wine prevent that from entering their diet?
I'm not sure the answer to that. I've not seen any studies on the vinclozolin level of wines, but it would certainly be something I would be aware of. I mean, there are some good organic wines out there that I would focus on for sure.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Or just not drink any alcohol.
Well, and that's the other option. It's interesting. When I started really monitoring my biometric data closely, it was enlightening to me to see. I mean, I always knew, alcohol is a toxin, but low dose toxins periodically are beneficial. I mean, it's a hormesis. But even one glass of wine, my heart rate variability drops for a day.
Mm.
Um, my stress level, I use a Garmin Phoenix 5, so I get stress markers too. My stress markers go up. My sleep quality goes down just from one glass of wine. And I'm not the only one that sees that. I mean, I see that in all of my clients. I haven't seen one single client that at least stayed baseline or got better. They all have a detriment in their baseline of health biometrics. And I even see if somebody has a glass of wine or two before their blood draws, the night before their blood draws, I'll see liver enzyme elevations. I mean, that's a natural response to a toxin is to see liver enzyme elevations.
I was very close to a doctor. We were really good friends, and I considered him highly intelligent. He's one of the smartest people I know. But when he met his now wife, she likes a bottle of wine every night, and so they would split a bottle of wine. And I noticed that over time he became almost like someone who had undiagnosed hypoglycemia. Just he became cranky and irritable at times, and even though he wasn't drinking during the day, he just seemed like he was having mood swings, right? Just he became uh, it would be very difficult to do business with him. He lost a lot of business partners, and his personality just changed. And I could see that this would happen, especially the day after I knew he had like 2 bottles of wine with his wife, that kind of thing. And I know that there's a direct relationship between consuming alcohol and sort of blood sugar swings, but the person who's drinking doesn't realize that it can be affecting not just that evening. Oh, I need to drink a glass of wine to relax and calm down, but it could be affecting their entire life. And both my parents had that mentality. They could come home and have a glass, share a bottle of wine to relax because they needed it to de-stress. Meanwhile, what you're saying is it actually increases stress.
Yeah, absolutely. It's and HRV is kind of an indirect measure of stress, and so what we look at is, and I don't care about, you want to have really super high numbers or anything like that. I care about the dynamics of it. So if you're running 40, 50, then you don't want to see it drop into the 30s. If it drops, then something in your lifestyle pattern isn't working. I see it a lot when people go through periods of, sleeping 5 or 6 hours instead of their normal 7.5 to 8 hours. I'll see their HRV drop for days after just a brief period of sleep interruption. So it's a good marker of just kind of health status, in my opinion. That's what we kind of use it for when we're doing coaching. Is this new diet really working? Because the funny thing about diets is when stress on the body is something that you perceive in a very positive light. So what I mean by that is you shift your diet. It's a shock to the system when you decide, okay, I'm going from this standard American diet. I'm going to eat keto. Well, you shift, and there's a huge stressor on the body. So if you looked at biometric data, you would see a drop in HRV, at least initially. But what happens is you get a cortisol release, and that cortisol causes more of a euphoria feeling in the stepwise process downstream. You can get this euphoria feeling. So when you shift into a dietary pattern, you get this misinterpretation that you're feeling really good on it because of the stress that you've induced in the body. It's like people who do like 2-3 day fasts. That's a huge stressor on the body, but you get almost a euphoric feeling after doing it. And so you perceive that as really beneficial to the body. When you look at HRV and you see that the HRV is actually indicating that there's a greater stress on the body that's not healthy. And so I like to use that HRV to correlate with the subjective findings to see if what we're doing is actually creating a positive outcome, or we just have the perception of a positive outcome with it.
Now for those who don't know what heart rate variability is, could you give us a little lesson on it?
I'll do the best I can on that. So, heart rate variability, it's not a matter of how much your heartbeat changes between breaths. It's more of how long the interval between beats is between breaths, and it's really healthy to have a large dynamic between that. So, at a full exhale, and I may have this backwards, but it's a longer period between beats, and then at a full inhale, it's a shorter period between beats.
I believe you're correct because when you're inhaling, the my understanding is that the heart wants to beat faster to allow more blood to pass through the lungs to oxygenate.
Right, and you get a better filling capacity of the chambers of the heart when
Hmm.
you're taking an inhale. But the difference between the slowest and the fastest in that breath is your heart rate variability, and it's a great marker of health in general. You have baseline levels that they say, if you're an elite athlete, and they measure these in all different measures, so it's hard to pick one measure that's ideal. Some use RMSSDs and these other kind of bizarre units. But generally, when we use heart math, a 40 to 50 is like elite level. Anything above 25 is somebody that's like a CrossFitter that's fit and healthy. But as we age, that heart rate variability goes down. So we don't have that variability between beats as much. And it's a good marker of fitness level and health level. So if we see the dynamic of, you have your established baseline and we see it dropping, then something that we've done has created a negative health outcome in general. Whereas if we're seeing a gradual rise in that with an intervention that's been done, we get an objective feeling that, okay, there may be something positive that's happening here with the changes that we've made.
Very exciting. And so someone can wear a device in the morning, every morning, and it'll read their heart rate variability, and they'll be able to see, wow, okay, what I did yesterday was good, or hey, that change I did yesterday is not working.
Well, I don't prefer single check-ins, and that's
Sure.
what a lot of people are doing. I like to see an average throughout the day. So I like the devices that do continuous HRV monitoring, like the Aura Ring, the BioStrap, the Garmin's, that are measuring multiple points throughout the day. Because if I look at my HRV changes in a day, it's pretty dramatic. I mean, if I happen to just be doing a spot check at a time when it's at its lowest point versus at its highest point, there can be a dramatic difference in what my perception is of that. So
Mm.
if I have an average throughout a day, I can at least look at that dynamic change in that average, and get a better idea of accuracy.
Does it read how stressed you are at a particular point? You can go back and look and be like, wow, I was really stressed out at 3 p.m. What was I doing then?
Yeah. Um, the it's funny, we kind of track some of that and we say, what's going on here. Like I said, I use the Garmin Phoenix 5, which is it's really the ultimate one to have if you're an athlete and you want traditional health monitoring. If you want just standard health monitoring, the Aura Ring or the BioStrap are awesome devices. Um, but we will constantly look at our HRV recordings and figure out what's going on. The Garmin uses first beat technology's algorithm to determine what they call a stress level. So this is a little different than HRV. It takes into account multiple different parameters to create a stress number for you, and it's measured throughout the day. And I can track and look at all of my numbers throughout the day, and I can see times like right after I've exercised. So it turns itself off during the exercise. And then as soon as I'm done with the exercise, it comes back on to the stress. And my stress level goes up because exercise is a stressor and it persists. And I can see how long it persists after the exercise has been completed, which is another marker of either how intense your workout was or how quickly you can return back to a baseline state. And like when I sleep, my stress level is very low. And I still look at my daily average, though, on the stress to get an idea of what's working and what's not working.
Excellent. Now, I know everyone is individual, and I'd love for you to share some general advice around sleep. What could listeners do, starting tonight to improve their sleep? Let's talk about some common sleep problems like waking up in the middle of the night and being unable to go back to sleep.
Well, first of all, you want to kind of figure out why that's happening. Is it something in the lifestyle that's not optimized that's creating that? Um, a lot of people, like we see a lot of people that have issues with glutamic acid. So a lot of people will think that they're gluten sensitive when there's really not such a thing as non-celiac gluten sensitivity. What they're actually experiencing, from what we've seen, is what we call glutamic acid sensitivity from GAD1 variants in their genetics. And GAD1 converts glutamic acid or glutamate into GABA. So glutamate is our most excitatory neurotransmitter, and GABA is one of our most inhibitory. There's an enzyme that converts those. But some people have variants in those enzymes, or they've epigenetically turned down the response of that enzyme. And so when they have a high glutamic acid level, their glutamate levels in the brain stay high. So we'll see a lot of people they have a lot of glutamic acid sources, and this is in the non-gluten grains as well, that they'll have ADD type symptoms during the day, or they'll be the person who can't turn the brain off at night. Now, people who wake up in the middle of the night, you got to look at what the reasons they're waking up. Like if somebody's waking up to go to the bathroom, usually what happens is they go to the bathroom and they turn on a light to see where they're going, and that light immediately shuts down their melatonin production and upregulates cortisol right from that point. So they're not going to be able to get back to sleep very well. I have them put like red light night lights in the bathroom so that they can go and not disrupt that circadian clock. Um, there's other people that have a natural tendency to wake up in the middle of the night. They call it second sleep, and it was very common ancestrally that people would go to sleep at sunset and they would wake up at like 1 or 2 in the morning and they'd be up for an hour and they go back to sleep. That is genetically programmed. We don't have a way to assess that. We just kind of go by their history of it. And if that's the case, then we just kind of work around it. You just say, okay, this is what's going to happen. Um, so there's a lot of variables that you can look at. You can look at their CYP1A2, which is what breaks down melatonin. Perhaps their melatonin surge gets broken down too quickly. It's the same enzyme that breaks down caffeine. So if you're a rapid metabolizer of caffeine, you're also going to rapidly metabolize melatonin. So you're going to have a limited supply from your surges, and those are the people that tend to wake up after sleep onset. In those kind of situations, you want to try to look at something like a sustained release melatonin or something like that.
I love your advice. It's so practical, and it's so nice to know that you're taking what a doctor is. The doctor means the docere, the Latin or the root word docere, which means teacher. And you're being that person's teacher, that person's coach, and you're sitting there, looking at all the information, and then you're teaching them, okay, here's what you can do, and here's what you can do in a way that's not threatening, non-confrontational. You're not making anyone feel guilty. You're just giving them all the science-based advice that can help them to navigate and make better choices.
And that's where we need to kind of go as clinicians, as coaches. It's what we have seen work really well in our medical practice and in the coaches that we've trained in the academy. I mean, they're having great results with this.
For those who you have too much glutamic acid or having that issue, you mentioned that it's not just gluten grains, it's in other grains as well. Would they thrive on a grain-free diet?
Well, not necessarily grain free, but they could minimize their evening intake of glutamic acid sources, and that helps a lot. Also, things like magnesium glycinate actually helps to mitigate some of that issue of the balance between glutamate and GABA at night. So we've seen really good results with the people who carry GAD1 variants when they use magnesium glycinate as a supplement before bedtime.
Mm. Now, I know you're really taking into account so many factors, including all of their genetics and their lifestyle and everything they share with you. But I'm sort of hearing you have some opinions about maybe across the board certain foods you'd like everyone to avoid. Could you share with the listeners what foods you find just are not helpful to have in the diet, and what foods you think are very healing that everyone should have in their diet?
Well, olive oil is number one. Olive oil and seafood is a primary protein. Those are two that I've seen pretty universal positive outcomes with. And again, it's not for everybody. So, like I say, we revolve around a Mediterranean diet. Depending on genetics, we will shift towards a higher fat diet and even up to 10% in saturated fat. Now, I don't go over 10% recommendations on saturated fat, even in ApoE 3 threes or 2 threes. I still keep the saturated fat less than 10%, despite all these online health gurus that promote, eat all the saturated fat you want. There's a great deal of long-term implications to that. I mean, I can't tell you the number of people that have been bulletproof converts that come to me and they have cholesterol levels of over 500. That just didn't quite understand that it's not for everybody. And
Mm-hmm.
there are some people it works well for, but there's some people that is very detrimental on. And without getting biometric data to understand that, they just go by, oh, I'm feeling pretty good. So they need to be sure to get that. Now, my recommendation basically is eat foods that are as natural as possible, and there's not much natural food left in this world. Even Even our organic vegetables are not natural anymore. They've been modified over centuries of crossbreeding and everything else. I mean, genetic modification started with corn, in my opinion, which was a grass before it became an ear of corn, um, through our own genetic modification without doing it through a laboratory. So there's a significant change in foods, but if you really focus on things that are kind of natural foods and organic, you do a pretty good job of that. Now, I'm also not the person who says don't, avoid all this stuff that tastes really good. I like pizza, and I allow myself to have pizza about once or twice a month. And I believe that there is a hormetic effect to it where, small doses of toxins are actually beneficial for you. They actually make you stronger. So I don't try to completely avoid that. I also don't like diets that limit macronutrients in some way. So extreme low carb or extreme low fat, those just don't tend to work for me.
Mm-hmm. I go by how I feel over time. So I know if I ate any dairy, even if it was cheese on pizza, I just for 3 days, I just would not feel good. It makes my immune system plummet. Um, there's so many negative effects. So we make pizza at home, and we don't use cheese, but we figure out how to make something that is like a cauliflower crust, and we have a lot of fun with it. It tastes actually just like pizza, but we play around with it, and our thing has been, because it's like shooting darts in the dark, right? It's what's healthy for me, and I go, so far I've been going based on how we feel, and are we still healthy, or are we getting sick? What's going on? And I love this new information about including the heart rate variability. I've been hearing about heart rate variability, but I haven't yet gotten a monitor. And one of my best friends, he is all about them. He's a meditation expert and teaches meditation, and he's all about it because he, says if you lower your breath to between 4 and 7 breaths a minute, just equal parts in and out with no pauses in between. Just breathe in slowly and then breathe out slowly. And if you could just get it down to your counting to like 5 or 6 seconds while you're breathing in, then breathing out. He goes, you do that every day for a few minutes, your heart rate variability improves dramatically. And he's gotten people into, deeper and deeper meditation just with a simple breathing. I think a lot of people are feeling threatened by the word meditation because they're like, I have to learn something that has to do with focus in my mind, and that sounds complicated, and or maybe it goes against their religion. But really, meditation is, you could just say, okay, forget the word meditation or yoga, just breathe in and out on a count of 6, and just focus on your breath, and do that for starting at 5 minutes, and then do that like maybe twice a day. And there you go. You're basically getting all the same, in terms of the heart rate variability, you're getting all the same benefits. What do you say to your patients or your clients when you want them to meditate? Because like you said, there's, didn't you say there's 1,500 different genetic expressions shift when we meditate daily?
Yeah, and you hit on it. I mean, a lot of this is the breath work. So all this stuff, Tai Chi, meditation, all of it, what it comes down to is structuring the breath. And so we actually do an assessment on all of our clients when they first start. We look at their breath structure, we look at their respiratory rate, and we look at things like, are they breathing in the chest? Are they breathing in the belly? And what we find is, and we also measure expired carbon dioxide levels, which is really relevant. We're finding huge impacts on expired CO2. But what we find is that the majority of people don't know how to breathe. So we have to actually deprogram them on their breathing. They'll come in and, they will be breathing in a baseline state of anywhere from 16 to 20 breaths per minute,
Mm.
and they don't understand that that's anxiety breathing, and they don't understand why they walk around with anxiety most of the time. And I know all of your listeners are sitting there counting their breaths right now to see where they are at baseline. That's what usually happens. But the healthy breath rate is 5 to 8 times a minute. And very few people that we've encountered in a resting state breathe at that rate. So trying to train people to get into that rate, and then the structure of the breath. Do they hold at the top? Do they hold at the exhale? Is it a nice smooth up and down inhale, exhale? People do these box breathing techniques and everything like that, and those are great for building up your carbon dioxide, which is what you're trying to do. But it's not a natural breathing technique. You want to train natural breathing with that 5 to 8 breaths per minute, but you also want to look at, are they breathing it into the stomach or are they breathing it into the chest? What's their expired CO2 when they're doing this? There's a lot more that goes into breath work than just following an app. Apps can help you by training that, but you can do, like, the HeartMath device has a nice way to kind of guide the breath while it's measuring your HRV to see if it's working well. We really like HeartMath as a take-home device for people. But full assessment really requires getting the carbon dioxide levels, looking at the chest versus belly breathing, and seeing what pattern works best for each individual.
Nice. Now, without mentioning any names, because I know you would want to keep client confidentiality, can you share some case studies with us? Like someone off the top of your head, when they came in, what were their complaints? What did all your tests reveal? What kind of plan did you give them, and what were the outcomes?
I can't pick any one individual. I've got so many, and everybody's completely different. I mean, every plan is completely different. So there's not there's no cookie cutter aspect to really doing a health monitoring. I mean, like I said, I've seen people that come in doing bulletproof and their numbers are off the chart. I see people that come in that are vegetarian that are actually creating more negative health outcomes. And these are people that generally feel okay. There's something that they'll come in and they'll say, I know I can be better. I'm just not quite there. But we find these huge impacts that they're not even aware of in either lab work or biometric data or something. And they become convinced when they make these changes and they feel the difference. Most of us are so used to feeling bad that it becomes normal, and we get into this normalization of average, I like to say. So instead of being awesome and optimized, they tend to accept this as the average or the healthy, in their opinion, when they can be so much better.
Well, even on lab work, I know because I've worked with naturopaths for so many years, how naturopaths perceive your blood work is so different from how an MD would. Naturopaths are looking to sort of be ahead of the curve and optimal health, and so they're looking at your blood work, going, okay, I know this is within normal ranges, but what is a normal range? Normal range is the average of sort of all the people. This isn't necessarily a representation of of this person being in optimal health. And so it sounds like what you're doing is you're going, okay, you don't want to be a statistic, so why are we, trying to just be normal, like, or normal or abnormal? We want to be optimal and excellent.
Yeah, very few people have a desire as a child to grow up to be average. Uh, so why do we settle for that?
In understanding how your clinic functions, it really does sound like what you're doing is what every MD should be doing.
Well, it's beyond MDs, though. This is what we do. 95% of what I do is lifestyle. Um, it's only 5% medicine. And that's why we train coaches in our academy. Our academy, we have 120 coaches right now from all over the world. About a quarter of them are physicians. The rest of them are chiropractors, naturopaths, acupuncturists, dietitians, psychologists, health coaches, all training together on the same platform. But it's a tribe of people. They call themselves the genome or the Piron gurus, and it's a great tribe of people. I mean, we have a private Facebook page, and you'd think there are 1,000 people on there or 10,000 people with a number of comments, and interactions. I mean, we'll have one coach who's a acupuncturist, and she'll post some labs, and you've got 6 physicians giving guidance, and chiropractors coming in, and health coaches providing input. So everybody shares on the platform. It's a pretty amazing group, and they're all passionate about changing or creating this new paradigm.
What kind of what kind of results have you been blown away by? Like, you don't ever know after you give someone a plan. You have an idea or a hope or an image in your mind as to what's going to happen, but then they take your advice and they run with it, and you are blown away by how the body has this innate ability to heal itself. Can you share with us a testimonial, a story, or a few stories of success?
I mean, like I said, it's different for everybody, and I'm not amazed by any outcome. Truly, um, the body is capable of doing some pretty miraculous things. If you want to go into kind of a disease model, and most of my clients are healthy to begin with, so they usually don't come in with any chronic health issues. But I've had a couple of people with MS that came in that we didn't focus on treating their MS. We focused on the whole human system. And I had one woman that she was down to about 100 pounds, and her MS doctor told her, it was in the final stages. She was in a wheelchair most of the time. And she stayed with us 3 years until she felt like she had achieved what she needed from us, and she knew what to do going forward. But she progressed through getting out of the wheelchair and using a walker on a regular basis, then to a cane, then to walking without assistance, and then to driving a car again. And she had gained 25 pounds, mostly of muscle, in the time that she spent with us. And it was pretty impressive to see what she was able to accomplish with the changes in lifestyle patterns, supplementation patterns, and things like that most people would have written her off for.
That's really exciting. Now, why is it that fairly healthy people are attracted to your clinic? Because they want to optimize and gain, like, enhance their health as much as possible, versus, you'd think that all the people with autoimmune and Lyme disease and fibromyalgia and you name it would be banging down your door to get their health back.
Well, I have a lot that ask. I'm very selective in bringing people on, and the reason for that is we focus on a certain mindset. And a lot of people with chronic disease, and I'm not stereotyping here, but a lot of people with chronic disease have ended up owning the disease. It becomes them. They become victims of it. And it is very tough to break that victim mentality when it comes to chronic illness, especially when you've had so many different practitioners that have labeled them with that. Oh, you've got chronic Lyme disease. Well, not necessarily. You have chronic inflammatory response syndrome, which is a constellation of symptoms that means the body's out of homeostasis, and now we need to get it back into shape. But as long as they're attached to that diagnosis of chronic Lyme disease, it's very difficult. We run into the same thing with diabetics. They think that they're stuck with this because they've been diagnosed with diabetes, and that it's a disease. It's not a disease. It's a syndrome of insulin resistance relating to lifestyle patterns. Type 1 is a little different, but still yet it's an autoimmune system. It's an immune system that's out of balance. And I always ask every client when they first get on an interview with me to become a client, I say, can you picture a time in the future? And I'm not just talking about picturing this, I'm talking about actually experiencing this, a time in the future when you are free of all of this and you're healthy and doing something. And if they can't picture that, then I turn them away. I had one young woman who was in her mid 30s that was diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis, and she was a 7 out of 10 if she didn't take her medication. And she wanted to have a baby, but she couldn't get pregnant while she was on the medication. And I said, can you see a time in the near future where you are pain-free rolling around in the grass with your child? And she said, I can't picture that right now. And the thing is, they're not ready for the process. Um, as long as that mindset is there, it's going to be very difficult, almost impossible to break. So getting people to break out of that victim mentality, that situation of feeling like they've identified with their disease, is a difficult one. And I don't want to sound like I'm being heartless or anything like that. It's just what I've noticed from my experience with it is those are the people that are going to have a lot of difficulty. So they need to do some work on mindset before they're ready for our program.
Can you recommend some resources to work on mindset? I know for me, I would recommend doing Landmark Education. They have some great personal growth courses that'll definitely beat the victim out of you.
Yeah, yeah, they're really good. I mean, even just reading Carol Dweck's book on mindset, and really understanding it. But I think you also need a coach. So find somebody that specializes in mindset.
Wonderful. And when you see someone shift their mindset, I've personally seen this where someone shifts their mindset and all of a sudden they're getting health results so much faster. And it doesn't quite make sense because they could be, exercising and going through the motions, but with the wrong mindset, they're not really getting the right outcomes. There's something so interesting about that mind body connection.
Yeah, and that's, I've had clients that I've turned away, and they come back to me after they've broken through that, and I'm happy to work with them at that point. But it's a very frustrating process for me. I mean, I spend a lot of time with clients, and they spend a lot of money to come and see me. So I don't want them wasting their money or my time in order to not have optimal outcomes.
Mm. Now, I want to talk about your two websites, your center and also your academy. Now, and your new podcast. I know you've had a podcast in the past, but you are launching a new podcast called Sovereign Human. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, sovereign humans is a new foray for us. I mean, Apeiron is about limitless nature of the human state, but also what we want to get into is the sovereignty of the human, where we have the responsibility for our own health, our own success, our own destinies, essentially. And it's about us being able to do that. I mean, you see a lot of I run in a world of biohackers, and a lot of my clients are biohackers, and so they're doing things that aren't necessarily approved, and I can't recommend that they do those kind of things, but I can give them guidance on it. I can at least educate them on aspects of it, because we do believe in the sovereignty of the human body. You have the full right to do what you want to do. I mean, there's a lot of discussion about, well, these DIY biohackers, I don't want to pay for their health insurance, when they do something stupid and they end up in a hospital because they did it. But you don't see that same argument for the person who's sitting there eating potato chips and drinking sodas, um, that we're paying for their insurance. So, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense in that regard. But sovereignty is about really just having that responsibility for your own um, life, all aspects of your life. So we explore things like consciousness. We explore things like DIY testing of different things, but it's just about really that state of the limitless human that we're exploring in the podcast, and it should launch very shortly.
Very cool. Well, I know my listeners love health podcasts, so they'll love checking yours out. Where is your center? Aperon Center, and it's aperoncenter.com is going to be the links to everything you do is going to be the show notes of today's podcast at learntohealth.com. Where's your center? How can people work with you? And what does it look like? You've kind of painted a little bit of a picture. What does it look like to work with you?
Well, it's apeironcenter.com. It's APEIRON center.com, and it means limitless. Um, but we have our main office in Asheville, North Carolina. I actually live in Austin, Texas, but I go back once a month to see clients in person there. The rest of the time I work virtually with them. Um, we're getting ready to open an office in Austin with our new physician, Dr. Bob Harding, who's a functional medicine trained physician. And that's going to open in August of 2018. And then we're looking at one in Sarasota as well. But we have the physician, we have PAs in the office for those that can't, they want to do what we offer, but don't have the financial means to afford the physician services. And we have health coaches. We have health coaches all around the world that we can pair people with that can do all aspects of what we do. And like I said, 25% of those are physicians, so they're spread out all around the United States and in at least a dozen foreign countries right now.
Very cool. And you also have your academy. Tell us a bit about that. Now, can anyone join your academy, or do they need to be a healthcare practitioner?
Yeah, anybody with the right kind of passion and mindset. So we have people sign up and get on a call with me, and I kind of figure out if they're kind of ready for what we teach. But I basically have a little over 100 hours of online training modules that we take them through, how to read genetic data, how to do epigenetic coaching, all aspects of lifestyle. So everything that I do in my medical practice, I train the gurus in the academy, and that's appear on .academy, not a .com, but just .academy. Um, and it's growing. I mean, we've only launched it about a year ago. Like I said, we've got over 120 coaches already enrolled, and we're growing very rapidly and spreading across the world to change the whole paradigm.
Nice. And are they getting the same kind of results you can get, or is like going to you, like going to the best doctor in the world and then going to your health coach is something less, or is it all across the board, optimizing health and seeing you is just as good as seeing one of your health coaches?
Yeah, I'm training them on everything that I do, and the only thing they can't do is actually prescribe. They're actually able to get blood work on clients, so even our health coaches that are not physicians are able to line clients up to get blood work, um, and they're trained in lifestyle coaching essentially. We call it epigenetic coaching, but we work with transgenerational epigenetics. We work with pre-pregnancy planning. So some of our coaches specialize in how to prepare couples for pregnancy to optimize gene expression in the child.
Hmm.
It's just really cool stuff. And our coaches have a great life. I mean, most of them are working virtually, and so they have access to people from all over the world as clients. They do only our coaches get access to our genetic reports, which are our full reports 90 pages long. So it's a pretty in-depth report, but we do not allow direct-to-consumer access to it.
That's interesting. That's kind of a fear some people have is when they do genetic testing that their genes are now owned by the lab or somehow owned by the government or owned by some kind of corporation that could use them in some kind of experiment. When they do their genetic testing with you, does that protect their genes to keep it private?
Well, right now we use 23andMe data, so we extract from there, but we have our own genetic test coming out at the end of June, which is a cheek swab rather than a big spit test, which a lot of people didn't like with 23andMe. But we run it on an Illumina array, which is the same kind of array that's used in research, same one that used in 23andMe. But we get a lot of additional genetics from it. So 23andMe changed their array in August of last year, so they lost a lot of really good, especially detoxification variants, and we've added those back onto ours, plus ones that neither version of 23andMe had that we can look at. But all of our coaches are trained in the interpretation of all the genetics in those.
Oh, very cool. Excellent. Well, do you have any? I know a lot of my listeners, we have a lot of healthcare professionals. I know you've definitely piqued interest. I'm sure you're going to be receiving some wonderful phone calls from some of our listeners interested in either joining your academy or becoming a client if you're one of your health coaches. Can you give some lifestyle and health advice? I know it's kind of across the board, so not looking at anyone's labs or anyone's data, but what kind of general like good things, good practice could we all do to be healthier that maybe we don't know is something we really should implement?
Well, essentially, pay attention to your own um, body and the messages it's feeding you. Get a good biometric device and get a good health coach that can look objectively at it. I mean, everybody thinks that they're experts in health, but even Tiger Woods needs a golf coach, and it's not about whether he's better than the coach or not. It's a matter of the coach being that objective person that can look at things in a different light.
I love your example. It's so true. Uh, it's so great to have someone to look at everything, and because I've even talked to a few other healthcare professionals, and they have blind spots about their own health because they're, like you said, one's a thyroid expert, or one's a blood sugar expert, or one's a really loves to help people heal chronic adrenal fatigue, and they have blind spots to their own health because they're focusing so heavily on one area. They can't be objective. So no matter how great they are as a doctor, or if they're maybe a very well educated patient, it really is nice to have someone look at us as a whole and help us to see what we're missing, because there's always room for improvement.
Well, I have my own health coach, and he has no medical training whatsoever. he is he is self-taught in it, and he gives me an objective perspective that I can't give myself.
Can you share with us, is there anything that he's caught that was in your blind spot?
Yeah, he's focused on the fact that I've been missing out on some of my cognitive flexibility with learning. So I haven't optimized my learning. I've been very stovepiped in what I do because of creating the courses for the academy and all of that. And he's like, "Well, have you taken the time to learn that second language yet, or have you started playing an instrument?" I was like, "No, I don't have time for that." He goes, "Yeah, you do." He said, "Come on, let's get on it." Uh, so that was just a text I got yesterday, and so he's after me to really pay attention to the fact that I am kind of missing aspects of that holistic approach that I promote, that I'm not quite fully living in that regard.
Oh, I get it. So if we were all to sort of push ourselves to read books we never thought we would read, or learn languages, or travel, or learn an instrument, that would help our brain become healthier, because we're challenging parts of our brain and parts of our learning that we're not used to, and because we tend to kind of live in this one particular pattern, right? Over time, we sort of just do the same things every day, and we don't create that behavioral flexibility, or that flexibility to expand our learning after school, right? And so, is that what you're saying? You got to push yourself to try new things and new experiences, and make sure that you are studying a new language or new instrument every year.
Right. There's no growth in the familiar zone. You only get growth when you venture out into a little bit of uh, uncomfortable areas, and so you've got to continually press that. And once you get mastered at that, that becomes your new familiar zone. So it's time to move on to something new.
I think you just called out all the healthcare practitioners that listen on the show, and let them know that maybe they should take your course, because they too have been in the familiar zone, and they need to start studying something that's unfamiliar so they can expand themselves and expand their mind.
Exactly.
Excellent. Well, it's been such a pleasure, Dr. Stickler, to have you on the show today. Is there anything you'd like to say to wrap up our interview?
Um, One thing we have started a new it's kind of a new social media that steps away from Facebook, because Facebook is so controlling over things and
Mm-hmm.
decides who gets to see what. So we started a new website called apeiron.me. So it's apeiron.me. And we just launched it 2 weeks ago, and it's kind of in a beta right now, but it looks and feels just like Facebook, but it's all about health optimization. So it's a very very focused area for people that don't want to have to see cat pictures or birthdays and political rants all the time. It's just yeah. And coaches can actually set up their own private groups on there and actually be able to make sure that if they post something, it goes to all the members of their group rather than just the select few that Facebook decides to send it to.
Oh, I love it. So you're creating the healthy version of Facebook.
Exactly.
Excellent. Well, make sure that link is in the show notes of the podcast today. Thank you so much. This has been very enlightening.
It was a real pleasure.
Hello, true health seeker. Have you ever thought about becoming a health coach? Do you love learning about nutrition and how we can shift our lifestyle and our diet so that we can gain optimal health and happiness and longevity? Do you love helping your friends and family to solve their health problems and to figure out what they can do to eat healthier? Are you interested in becoming someone who can grow their own business, support people in their success? Do you love helping people? You might be the perfect candidate to become a health coach. I highly recommend checking out the Institute for Integrative Nutrition. I just spent the last year in their health coaching certification program, and it really blew me away. It was so amazing. I learned over 100 dietary theories. I learned all about nutrition, but from a standpoint of how we can help people to shift their life and shift their lifestyle to gain true holistic health. I definitely recommend you check them out. You can Google Institute for Integrative Nutrition or IIN and give them a call, or you can go to learntruehealth.com/coach and you can receive a free module of their training to check it out and see if it's something that you'd be interested in. Be sure to mention my name, Ashley James, in the Learn True Health podcast, because I made a deal with them that they will give you the best price possible. I highly recommend checking it out. It really changed my life to be in their program, and I'm such a big advocate that I wanted to spread this information. We need more health coaches. In fact, health coaching is the largest growing career right now in the health field. So many health coaches are getting in and helping people because you can work in chiropractic offices, doctors' offices, you can work in hospitals, you can work online through Skype and help people around the world. You can become an author, you can go into the school system and help your local schools shift their programs to help children be healthier. You can go into senior centers and help them to shift their diet and lifestyle to best support them in their success and their health goals. There's so many different available options for you when you become a certified health coach. So check out IIN, check out the Institute for Integrative Nutrition, mention my name, get the best deal. Give them a call and they'll give you lots of free information and help you to see if this is the right move for you. Classes are starting soon. The next round of classes are starting at the end of the month. So you're going to want to call them now and check it out. And if you know anyone in your life who would be an amazing coach, please tell them about it. Being a health coach is so rewarding and you get to help so many people. Have a fantastic day and enjoy this amazing interview.